We are now going to cut out layer 2. Layer 2 is this light layer on the card, and I only put enough shapes for layer 2 to cover the outside of the card. If you want to put layer 2 on the inside of the card, then just cut out as many squares and rectangles of layer 2 as you did layer 1. If you don't want to do all that cutting and you'd like to use your dies, you can use the second smallest stitched rectangle die in the Stampin' Up! Set. If you just want to cut, you don't want to use dies, or you don't have dies, then you can cut using the cutting guide that I have. For this, the width of the rectangles and the squares are all going to be 1 9/16. And the length or the height of the rectangles is going to be 3 5/8. And the squares are square, so obviously their length and width are going to be the same. I'm going to set this up and cut it like I did the last one. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to keep moving the sheet across the cutter this way so that I'm always just lining up to 1 9/16 over on this end. So 9/16 is just over 1/2 inch. I know that you know that, but I'm saying it anyway. I'm going to make sure that this is square. We can use my line as a cutting guide, or we can use the actual lines on the cutter. It's totally up to you. Oh, that's the score. We don't want that. Okay, so setting it up that way, I ended up a little bit large. But we're going to roll with it. I think it's going to work out. It actually looks like I might not have been square. Yeah, I wasn't square there. So we can try to square it up, or we can just leave it. I'm going to leave it. We can square up the individual squares if we want. So again, 1 9/16 here, or we can use my cutting line. And then the same thing on this one, and it's going to give us a nice piece of scrap that we can use for other things. We're going to set this aside. We can use this for other things. If you want to cover the inside of the card with layer 2, you can use this to do that. I'm going to just set it aside. And now we're going to cut all of these squares. Again, 1 9/16 inches. We can measure, or we can use the cutting line. Oh, and I find that when I'm cutting things this small, the paper wants to move around on me, so it can be kind of challenging to hold the paper down. Now on this one, I'm not going to use the square dies. I'm just going to leave it as is, but you of course can use the square dies if you want to add that cool little stitched effect. There we are. Got to hold that down. Remember to hold it down or you're going to screw up your cuts and your cutting lines. And you can see there that this isn't square. So, because it moved a little. So I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to try to square it up. Sometimes this makes things worse. Sometimes I'm not actually able to do it. Sometimes you're just better leaving well enough alone. Okay, I'm going to hold this down as best I can. I have a guillotine cutter or a whacking cutter as I call it, and I really like to use that, but it doesn't have measurements that are as fine as I'm doing on this card. But I often find it's easier to hold my paper in position on that. I've got my squares cut out. Gonna set them aside. And if you want more, you can just keep lining this strip up at 1 9/16 inches and going to town on it. Now we're going to cut our 2 rectangles, and they are going to be 3 and 5/8. So 4/8 is the same as 1/2 inch, and we're going to go 1/8 over, and that'll be 5/8. And I'm sorry, I know everyone knows how to measure. And so again, that's 3 and 5/8. We can also just use the lines that we have set up on our paper. And now we've got some scraps that we can set aside too.